Hello everyone. So this is the first of a series of videos by Professor Charu, which are focused on demand. So just a little recap so you can remember where we are in our narrative and storytelling. We did the production possibility frontiers, which was a depiction of the choices we had on what an economy could do, but we didn't actually have a good theory about how the economy made those choices. We then took a step back and thought about the circular flow, where we looked about the kinds of relationships that we saw within an economy, where some kind of coordination had to happen so that members of the economy could coordinate their actions to make these decisions about what, how much, and whom, for whom to produce. And that was the circular flow, where we were looking at consumers, producers, input markets, input suppliers, and so on. And then we took a step back and said, there's lots of different ways of doing this. The dominant way of doing it, which is going to be the focus of our course, not exclusively, but majority of the time, is going to be the market mechanism. And that's because in our society, we live in a world where that's the way we do it. It's not the way it's always been done. It's not the way in which every society does it. Even in our society, there's lots of moments where we don't use the market mechanism to decide what, how much, and for whom to produce. If you talk to members of a family, people don't tell you, I look at the market mechanism and see how much money my children can pay before I decide whether I give them food. We don't do that, right? Inside households, we actually don't use market mechanisms. And we'd be kind of creeped out if people used market mechanisms and prices and money to talk about the relationship between their parents, themselves, their grandma, whatever, right? It's not just that the market mechanism isn't used everywhere, it's that all of us actually have ideas about where it should be used and where it shouldn't be used. We'd get really upset if we use the market mechanism to leave the household for a minute, if we use the market mechanism for judgment. If you heard that lawyers and judges were going to sell judgment to the highest payer, you wouldn't say, oh, lovely, the market's at work. You'd be like, wait, isn't that corrupt? We expect our legal system to not operate by the market mechanism. We expect our politicians to not be available to the highest bidder. Right? So there's actually entire spheres of life where we think the market mechanism should not be in operation. That said, there are spheres of life where we think the market mechanism should be in operation, and it actually, for many of us, and as we'll figure out as we go on, we have ways of thinking about whether, okay, is this a good decision to go through markets? Is this something that works with markets? What's going on? But before you come to that point, it's kind of useful to figure out what the market mechanism is. How does it work? You can't really assess whether a mechanism is good or bad if you don't know how it works. And finally, if you know how it works, you can avoid blanket judgments. You can avoid that 1-0 thinking where somebody says to you, is it good, is it bad? And you want to reply and say, well, wait a minute. What kind of question is that? Is it good? Is it bad? You want to ask, good for what? Good in what circumstances? Good for which decisions? And good when? And that is what this course is about teaching you. So for me to get you there, I first need to get you to understand just how it works. Not whether it's good or bad, just how it works. So the simplest way to think of a market mechanism is to think of multiple types of markets. And we're going to start with the simplest one, the one that most of us are familiar with and have experienced. Markets in final goods and services. These are the markets where people buying things like apples, oranges, newspapers, milk, ordinary everyday final goods and services meet, as consumers, meet people who are selling these ordinary everyday goods and services. It's when you go to the Rite Aid to buy something. It's when you decide whether you want to go to the Safeway, or you want to go to Whole Foods, or you want to go to the local farmers market to get your tomatoes. That is the level at which we're going to start. We're going to complicate this as we go on. But our first market mechanism, therefore, is going to be what is called the very simple, basic, competitive market of supply and demand. Consumers buying final goods and services, meeting producers selling final goods and services. This is not the way in which other markets, say labor markets where people selling their labor meet firms buying their labor, financial markets where people selling bonds and stocks, which is trying to borrow debt, acquire debt in exchange for people who are trying to dispose of their savings. This is not the way necessarily in which a whole lot of markets work. But if we start here, this will give us some insights that we can carry forward even to these other markets. So we can adjust some of the insights we learn here to say, oh, okay, I figured this out. What am I going to adjust for these other markets? So let's start now with the simplest of markets, where consumers meet producers, the supply and demand market. One of the things we're trying to figure out, which is the economic question, is the question of coordination. Millions of people individually making individual decisions. How does all of this work out? How does somebody know that I want to buy milk and make sure that milk is supplied to Rite Aid at the right time so that when I go there, the milk is there and I can buy it at that price? And the answer is the coordination is done through the institution of markets. And we need to therefore understand how that works. Our understanding is that this is an institution that will end up coordinating decisions between two groups of people, consumers and producers, who actually do not know each other. And this is quite crucial. When I go into the market, I mean, even if I'm political and I say I want to make sure my stuff is not produced by child labor and so on, when I go to the market, I don't actually have huge conversation with the person checking out my stuff about where the milk bottle I bought was produced. I don't go to them and say, here's a gallon of milk. Where did this come from? Nor, as it turns out, do I negotiate them about prices. I don't go to them and say, oh, there's a price mark here of $3. I'll pay you $2 for it. How many of you have done that? Gone to Rite Aid or Safeway and say, I'll only pay you $2 for your milk. That doesn't happen. What happens instead is millions of us, no matter what we think about things, we show up, we look at prices, and we make a decision. So the first thing we're going to say is the ordinary everyday consumer is somebody who makes consumption decisions by looking at prices and deciding how much to buy. In other words, what we're saying is the ordinary consumer decides what to buy. Q, quantity, demanded D, as a result of just looking at the prices. X just stands for the good. In this case, I'm maybe going to talk about milk. So quantity demanded of good X is a function of the price of good X. And then I'm going to add this sentence here, ceteris paribus. And that just means other things equal. What this means is, of course I know how much milk I buy. Depends on a lot of things beyond the price of milk. I read the newspaper and it says, don't buy milk. It's going to give cholesterol and you're aging. Or I look something else and it says, milk, bovine growth hormone. Be real careful. It's terrible. Or sometimes I see something that says milk, it does the body good. Have you got your milk mustache? Calcium. All of these things, am I lactose intolerant? Do I love? All of them affect how much milk I buy, of course. But I'm going to call that ceteris paribus, which means I'm just going to hold all that constant for now. So it's like saying, setting my stage. All of that constant the main determinant of how much milk I buy will depend on the price of milk. I go into the market, I look at the price of milk, and I decide how much to buy. So quantity demanded is a function of the price of milk.